Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be analyzing different variations of vulnerable SQL injection login forms. So, as you can see here, we have the example shown in the screen. We have an example of a vulnerable SQL injection form. So the form, this is a login form, by the way. It starts from here, right, all the way down. Okay, so this is if we are talking about a login form and we want to try to bypass the login form. So most login forms, they operate behind, or they operate, there is database behind these login forms where you enter your username and password and you authenticate using the database, right? It could be MySQL, it could be Microsoft SQL, it could be SQLi, whatsoever. So in this video, we're going to be going variations of vulnerable codes and how we can exploit them with SQL injection attack or SQL injection attack. So this one example here, as you can see, we have defined the variable login, which takes the login form, as you can see, as a post request. And we have here the login and password. And both the login and password, they are taken as an input from the user and stored in the login variable and password variable, right? So the form contains field for login, right, and field for the password. So if we go down here, we can see the construct of the SQL statement. So SQL equal select star from heroes where login equal, we have here quotes, and here's the variable that contains most probably the username and password, and here's the variable that contains the value of the password fed by the user. So what's the problem with this code? What is the error here? The error is we took the input from the user, the password and login, and then we immediately use the supplied values for the login and the password immediately in the SQL statement. And we further constructed we connected to the database here. So we used the username and password stored in the SQL here and connected to the database immediately without sanitizing the input. So we have taken the input, right, the login password, and immediately used that in the SQL statement and executed whatever the user inputs, right, in the database. That's the problem with this code. So one would, before using the login and password in the SQL here, we first put some kind of sanitization. We filters for bad characters. I'm not going to go over the techniques. There are many techniques to sanitize and inspect the input supplied by the user. You can find them in OWASP documentation. What we're going to be doing here, we're going to be, for every scenario, so this scenario here, for example, if I go down, all right, and I type, how can we exploit that, right? So how can we provide such unsanitized input to take over the login form and be an administrator on the database or the site? So since the login form here, the login variable, which is the username, and the password, there is no quotes, right? So the login and the password are used without quotes. So in order to construct the payload or the SQL payload, we don't need to type code here, right? There is no need for the code. All right. So there are a couple of payloads that can be used with this code. So for example, we can use root and single quotes, and then we use or 1 equal 1, and we comment out. So this is one payload. So this is, let me name it first, or let's say payload 1. So this one here, as we don't have quotes, as the code doesn't use quotes, right, when using the supplied values, we don't need to put quote here before the used username. So I put here root as the username, right, and I use quote, right, and then after the quotes I used or or is a conditional operator where it executes the statement if one condition to be true is, one condition, if only one condition is true. So either this one or this one. In our case, this one will be false, right? But here we have 1 equal 1, and we commented out the rest of the, we ignored the rest of the SQL statement. So here, if we type that, it will execute successfully, and we will be logged in as root or admin, or whatever the admin name. Another example would be here, if we type comment out here, and we use, for example, code. We can use code, of course. And here we put, for example, or 1 equal 1, and we comment out. So this one, right, this payload here, let's name it as payload 2. So this payload resembles the first one, but we didn't use username before the single quote here. It doesn't matter as long as we don't have quotes surrounding the supplied variables. We can either use username without quote or single quote, of course, or we can only use a single quote at the beginning of the payload. Here we need to put or, and the statement after or are kind of they need to yield true all the time. So this one equal 1 or 2 equal 2, it cannot be 1 equal 2 because it's not, the statement will not be true, and the execution of SQL will not succeed. Here we comment out everything after the SQL statement, right? Another successful example would be, for example, here we type like or single quotes, and here or, and we can use double quotes equal. Oh, in this case, this will not work. No, this will not work. We can use single quote here, right? Or 1. This is payload 3. Now, why we didn't use a statement like this one, or 1 equal 1? Since we used here a single quote, right? That's okay. Now, or, and here 1, and right after the 1, we have commented out everything that comes after it, which means we're going to ignore every statement. Now, this one can be used, right? Use that to fill only the username field. So payload 3 here, payload 3 works only when you enter it in the username field. So here leave the password empty. So if you enter that in the username and password, it will not work because there is no condition to be true here, right? So we put only the username, and we comment out after 1 to ignore the requirement of entering the password field. Let's see how that works in a real scenario like BW app. I'm going to use the BW app here. So Kelly rolling. No. So this is my password. Let me minimize that and go here. All right. So here, let's go to bugs, go down, login hero. All right. So let's use this one. So here I supply the username with the payload and the password, and I log in. As you can see, we have been logged in successfully with the user Neo here. Now we can also try this one. So let's copy it. And we log in, and it is the same. So it works. We can also use another variation of the payload. We can use this one, but this one we need to enter it only in the login field. I don't know if it's going to work. So login. So it didn't work. As why? Since as you can see here, there is a requirement to enter the password, right?
So we received the error. MySQL error expects exactly one parameter, 0 were given. I don't think this is relevant. MySQL I error. Let's go down. Let's find this MySQL I error. So this is okay. MySQL I error. Okay. All right. This is irrelevant. Okay. All right. You still can use that. You still can use this payload only in the username field, but because of the error in the code here, we couldn't use that. Okay. Now let's review another variation of a vulnerable SQL in SQL login form. So if we go here to my attacking machine and we, all right, so let's look at this form. So here I have, right, username taken by a post request supplied by the user, and I have password supplied by the user, and here I construct the SQL query. Select username, password from the table users, where username equal, as you can see, the value, and the code here surrounds the username with single quotes, right? And the password here is surrounded by single quotes. Now, what's the difference? What is the difference between this code and this one? So as you can see here, the login variable and the password variable, there is no quotes, right? Which means that's why these payloads were successful. So these payloads didn't start with single quotes. We don't need to start with a single quote, or we can start with single quotes here, because there is no single quote surrounding the variables. But in a case like that, let's go back to, okay. So here, in a case like this, we have the variable, right, surrounded by single quotes. So the construction of the SQL payload will differ a bit, in a way that we need to start every payload with a single quote. So I'm writing here, every payload should start with single quote. Why? Because we need to close the quote here. All right. After closing the quote with our code, we can start injecting. So here I have quotes, right? So the injection would start, I close the quote here with 1, and I start injecting like or, let's say like double quotes equal single quote. So what's going to happen here? So the translation of that is select, or let's copy that, all of it. Okay. So in here, I have a quote, right? Now I close the quote, this one, with my quote, right? Now instead of uname, it's going to be here. Let's put like that. And I put quotes here, right? Which is this one. And then, or double quote, or double quote, yeah, equal quote. And I close the quote. So what I did here, I have two quotes here. I need to deal with these quotes, right? So I start my injection with a quote, and I close my injection with another quote. That is how it works. And you need to do the same with the password. The password here is going to be or equal, and that's it. Another way around this is we use the same one here, like we use this one. Where was the, okay, this payload here, we can use the same payload here, but on the hopes that the login form will accept leaving the password field empty. So here we can type or 1, that is the
payload here. We put the payload only in the username. So how this translates, how this works, and how it is executed behind in the database here. So we paste that and we go back. So in the username, so we leave the quotes of the code here. We have two quotes, right? And our payload contains one quote, right? So we put one here. I put space one, and then I used or, and this one, the database will understand that as true. So it's going to be true. And of course, I didn't need to put a quote here. Why? Since everything after true will be commented out by these, right? So everything after true will be ignored. So I don't need to put quote here. And the password, it could stay the same if the login form doesn't accept leaving the password empty. All right, so what if the query here, let's type another query, query 2. And let me copy all of that statement. Okay, now what if the username here, right, we use quote, right, and with the quotes we use some kind of parenthesis. Oh, what I did here. Okay, so here we put parentheses. Assume that the code is like that. All right, now what if the login form encapsulates the username and the password with parentheses and single quotes, as you can see here. So how we will construct our payload? The same principle applies here. So instead of closing the username and password with the quote, we start our payload, right? We started with quote and parentheses. So we use here quote and parentheses. So by using that, we close the first parentheses and the first quote of the username with our payload here. So our payload would start with something like that. And then we can put or true. That is one example. Another example is we can use the same way. So we close with single quote, parentheses, and we put here something like or 1. This will lead to true all the time. That is an example. Now, there are other variations actually of a vulnerable code, how it would look like and how you can construct your payload. So let's suppose that the query is something like query 3 equal. Okay. Now, instead of the single quotes, let's assume it is double quotes. Double quotes. And here is double quotes. So how our payload will look like, the same concept, you're right, you apply the same principle. You close with double quote and parentheses. Now, or to the same here, close with double quotes and then or 1. That's how it works. That's how it works from a vulnerable code perspective. Of course, sometimes you may not have access to the underlying or the PHP code. That is why you need to try every single payload of these if you are doing manual exploitation, right? Okay, sometimes the query would look like that. Query for equal. So instead of one parenthesis, we can use here like 2 and one single quote. So we have one single quote and one parenthesis. Also here, same way. So we are using double parentheses and one single quote. So the payload, I mean the when you initialize your testing, you would start your payload with something like single quote and 2 parentheses, right? Or true, the same way, or 1. So, and the list goes on and on and on. Now, this is very useful when you review PHP codes to not specifically PHP codes. I mean, SQL is everywhere, right? But when you review a code that contains a login form written in PHP, and there is a SQL query here in the PHP code, that's how you're going to review that. You're going to first find where is the user input, right? So user input is stored in login password. How it is supplied, here it is supplied directly. This is the first mistake. How it is used in the backend database, it has been executed directly. That's the second mistake, right? And the same way here. We took the username, we took the password from the user, we trust the user 100%, like ourselves. And exactly then we use the supplied info in the SQL query and we execute it here. So that's the first thing you look for when you review vulnerable PHP login or vulnerable login form written in PHP and uses SQL statements to connect with the database. Now, after reviewing the code, you might be required to construct some payloads according to how the code looks like. I believe there are hundreds of websites that use the same mechanism here. They are still relying on the same old mechanism. Of course, I'm gonna also I published a video before about reviewing SQL login form written in PHP and how we patch and sanitize the input. I'm going to put that video in the cards of sorry, not login cards, in the video cards on the left, on the right, so you can easily access it. So that was for today, and see you in the next video. And this is the documentation of the video. You can access the documentation of the video, of course, if you subscribe to the membership of the channel. And you can see here all of the stages we have gone through in this video are documented with screenshots and explanations. All right then, thank you so much.